Welcome to our series on St. Matthew's Gospel. We are in chapter 27 and we're dealing with the death of Jesus. I want to pick up in verse 45, okay? From the 6th hour, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. I shared that with you in the last episode. At about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani? That is, my God, why have you deserted me? When some of them, now them are the Sanhedrin, they quickly ran to get a sponge, which he dipped in vinegar and put it on a reed and offered it to Jesus to drink. And just as he was offering it, the others said, wait. The rest of them said. In other words, they didn't want Jesus to have anything. Wait, they said. See if Elijah will come and deliver him. But then Jesus, crying out in a loud voice, yielded up his spirit. So here we have a response of the Sanhedrin to Jesus' cry to the Father. And the response is that they twist his words to make it say something else. Okay? But first of all, the one person who did actually have some kind of sympathy in his heart would have put a sponge on the tip of a Roman spear to lift it up to Jesus. And what he would have offered Jesus was just a sip of the sour drink that the Roman soldiers themselves used in order to try and deal with the terrible thirst they had in the very high temperatures they were dealing with. But it seems as if the rest of the Sanhedrin wouldn't allow any sympathy, any love to go towards Jesus. So it means that there was no mitigation at all of suffering or of darkness or of difficulty or of hell that was thrown at Jesus, which only made his sacrifice even more heroic. Okay, but when they said that Elijah would come and maybe save Jesus, they were absolutely rejecting the gospel as we have actually read it, because Jesus had said already that Elijah had come, and we met the teaching on Elijah in chapter 3, 11 and 17. And in 11 and 17, Jesus had explained that John the Baptist was the Elijah, but the Sanhedrin refused to accept John the Baptist, and therefore they refused Jesus. But if John the Baptist has come, then Jesus is the Messiah. And if Jesus is the Messiah, then this is the end of the Mosaic era. And if they say he's calling upon Elijah, they are acknowledging that they're all in an end times mode, every one of them. And so their action doesn't make any sense. But then sin never did make sense. So verse 50 is extremely important. We're told that Jesus again crying out in a loud voice. The again is that when he cried to his Father, Eli, Eli, he cried in a loud voice. Now, we need to know that in this condition that Jesus was in, crying out in a loud voice was well nigh impossible, because he had had nothing to drink. He had nothing to eat. He had lost an enormous amount of blood. Psalm 22 said that his mouth was as dry as a potsherd. Under those conditions, to speak at all was very painful. But to cry out in a loud voice is impossible. So he gives them a little miracle, and they don't see it. They should have known that a man in his last breath is not able to cry with a loud voice, not at all. But of course, if you know your scriptures, the loud voice is extremely important. But the first thing Matthew wants you to hear is that Jesus died in total pain, total anguish, total surrender, total trust, and total love. That is victory. That is triumph. Because human beings seem to think that if I'm in pain, I don't have any obligation to love. If I'm struggling with something, I don't have an obligation to love. And Jesus showed that when he was in the depths of anguish and pain and struggle and difficulty and darkness and everything, he loved. And so the teaching that Jesus has given to us on love, you must love one another as I have loved you. That's the way John puts it. In Matthew chapter 5, he says, you must be like the sons of your Father. You must love your enemies. That doesn't mean put up with them. It means something absolutely positive. And so when you see the enemies of Jesus, namely the Sanhedrin, not giving him one moment of peace, that they're tormenting him right up to the last breath, then you have some idea of the standard that Jesus has raised for us. You must love your enemies. You must do good to those who hate you. You must bless those who curse you. Human nature can't do that. Only the grace of God can do that. So even though Jesus died in total pain and anguish and all the rest of it, it's a total triumph. And he did, in fact, make the connection across the chasm between himself and God. He took every challenge thrown at him, and something that is extremely important, but we don't look at it enough, is that the whole process of scourging, crowning wasn't normally a part of crucifixion, but the whole process of scourging and crucifixion was supposed to break a man down completely, so that he has no control over his body functions, he has no control over his emotions, he has no control over his thinking, he has lost control. And therefore, like a poor animal, he would just cry out about the pain that he is experiencing. That was not what they saw with Jesus of Nazareth, not at all. They saw somebody who never lost control, someone who kept his dignity, who kept his whole soul completely intact. And if he wanted to speak, he spoke. And if he didn't want to speak, he kept silent. They saw a man they could not break. They could not destroy. And the whole idea that the Sanhedrin had was to destroy this man in the eyes of everybody. They totally failed. They had no idea what love actually looked like. They also had no idea how strong humility makes you. They had no idea. And they didn't seem to understand that fortitude is steel for your soul. And when the hurricane comes at your soul, your skyscraper will stand. It may bend a little, but it'll stand. And so the people who acknowledged this extraordinary phenomenon that was looking at them were the Roman soldiers. Because after all, crucifying Jews was kind of ordinary for them. And they had seen how everybody else reacted. What they saw here was just a different subject altogether. Totally different. And Matthew is going to absolutely bring that out. But before I give you that, Jesus died in pain and in anguish and in total trust in God to win the grace for you and me to die in peace, in grace, and in love of God, therefore ensuring our salvation. So his pain is our peace. That's exactly what Isaiah said, that he was punished to give us peace. And so the peace and the joy with which we have seen so many Christians go back to God in, Jesus paid for that, and he paid for it on the cross. Matthew says he yielded up his spirit. Now this is something we don't give attention to either, and I'm just anxious to get you to look at it. We give the breath back to God. But we don't seem to realize that the name that the people of Israel had known God by was this: Yahweh. You say the first part of the name on the out breath, and you say the second part on the in breath. God is our very breath, is the meaning of that name. God is our very breath. And you're told back in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, that God breathed into Adam, and then Adam became like God. Because the Spirit of God, the breath of God, Ruach Adonai, was actually put into him. And when Ruach Adonai is operating in us, we actually think, speak, and act like God as well. But there's something else, very lovely thing I would like to share with you, and that is that the human race has been breathing the breath of God for millennia. And the older generation says, yeah. And the new generation says, just as the older generation gives back the breath to God, a new generation picks it up. And so the human race is breathing the breath of God all the time. This was brought home to me very wonderfully in a church in Durban in South Africa, where I was giving a parish retreat there. And in the same hospital, at the same hour, on the same day, a grandfather gave his breath back to God, and his grandson was born at exactly the same time. And this touched the entire parish. And so for the grandfather's funeral, we brought the newborn baby and we said, Yahweh is God's name. The old man gave the breath to the young one, and it was a little boy. And so they began to appreciate this, breathing the breath of God. And so when Jesus gives back the breath to God, this is what the human race does all the time. But unthinkingly, we don't seem to realize what we're doing. But we have to remember, because I kept on telling you all the time that as you go through the Passion, you've got to remember what was in the Gospel. In chapter 3, verse 15, Jesus had said to John the Baptist, come on, let you and I fulfill all righteousness. Now we know from watching Jesus dying what all righteousness is, that God is worshipped and revered, that you respond with utter humility and awe to God. And no matter what you're going through, no matter what is thrown at you, that you will still worship God, you will still love him, you will still obey him, and you will die in total trust. And so Jesus says to us as he gives the breath back, trust my Father beyond reason. Trust him. He knows what he's doing. And he also had said in chapter 5 and verse 17, I have not come to abolish the law, I have come to fulfill it and to bring it to completion. And what Jesus has brought to completion here is the prayer that every Jewish person says every day, the Shema Israel. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one Lord, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your being. And then they understood to add to it, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus has shown that completely. That's Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 to 10. Jesus has lived that absolutely. One final reminder, and then I move on. Chapter 28, Jesus said, you must understand that the Son of Man came on earth not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Many means everyone, but not everybody takes it. That's why they use the term many. And so Jesus gave Israel a sign in his passing that most people miss. And that sign is the loud cry. The loud cry. I told you it was impossible to do. But he gave them a sign. He gave them a prophetic sign. And the sign goes back to Amos chapter 1, verse 2. The Lord roars from Zion. He makes his voice heard in Jerusalem. Then the shepherd's pastures will mourn, and the people, the crown of Carmel will wither. Because what was heard was, a lamb had died, But the cry came from the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, which had triumphed. And so, for the first time, the human race was able to put together an apparent contradiction that Isaiah gave us in his prophecies about Christ. In chapter 9, he said that a child would be born for us and a son given to us, and upon him the government would be put on his shoulders, and he would be called Eternal Father, Mighty God, Prince of Peace, and his dominion would last forever. And because of him, that the lion and the lamb would lie together, which was an impossibility in the animal kingdom. Okay? But what they didn't realize was that the lion and the lamb were the one person. The people of Israel had never succeeded in putting the two streams of prophecy together. One stream of prophecy said he was going to be a royal king of the house of David, and so on, and he would be the Messiah. But the other stream of prophecy that came through the servant songs of Isaiah and Psalm 22 said that he would be a suffering servant and that he would give his life to redeem the human race. They had never been able to put those two together. But with this loud cry, the two are put together for the first time. And this cry of the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the lion means the king. This cry of the Lion of the tribe of Judah actually has an absolutely extraordinary effect on heaven, earth, and hell. Now, I mightn't be able to bring it to the three places, but I'll at least try one or two. This is the definitive cry. Now, I'll give it to you in perfectly ordinary language, and then we'll go back to the prophetic language. We've all seen the Olympic gold medal winner pass the point and realize that he or she has just won the world medal. And many of them throw themselves on their knees on the ground and they thank God. Many of them. They just can't believe it. It's like, I've done it. I've done it. This loud cry says, I've done it. Against all the odds, I've saved them. They don't realize they're saved. They don't understand anything that's going on, but I've actually done it. I've achieved it. That's one of the things that the loud cry is saying. The other loud cry, the other meaning of the loud cry is that Israel needs to take note. Something drastic is happening. Okay. First of all, let me read Revelation 17:14 for you. They will go to war against the Lamb. But the Lamb is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. That's who he is. And he will defeat them. And they will be defeated. But they will be defeated by his followers, the called, the chosen, the faithful. Now, at this particular moment at the death of Jesus, that seems an outlandish statement. Where are the called, the chosen, and the faithful? We're going to discover that at the foot of the cross, there's only a few people, most of them women. And yet this incredible miracle is going to happen, that the people whom he called, the people who accepted his call and became the chosen, the ones who will recover after he rises from the dead, they will in fact go out and conquer the world for him, for all generations. It's an incredible miracle. And so the people who are just standing here in the darkness, listening to this loud cry, the only thing they know is that something dreadful has happened. And St. Luke is the only one that tells you the reaction of the people, that they beat their breasts, which is a sign of mourning, and they go home. They realize something drastic has happened. Vindication comes for Jesus rather quickly, because when you go to the beginning of the gospel, it was the Father who announced his Son's arrival. It was the Father who guided the strangers from afar and brought them right to the place where his Son was born. And he was the one who announced who he was and explained everything. It's the Father who intervenes at the moment of the death of Jesus to tell Israel who he was. It's a bit late for Israel, but not for all of them, because you will find that when the apostles and the disciples of Jesus recover after the resurrection, and very particularly when the Holy Spirit comes upon them in Pentecost, they are going to, first of all, preach the gospel of Jesus in Jerusalem. And even on the day of Pentecost, we're told that 3,000 people surrender to the gospel. And in a very short time, it turns up to be 5,000. 3,000 and 5,000 are symbolic numbers. They don't count them. But 3 is the number for blessing, and 5 is the number for the Torah, or the people of God. And it means that in spite of all that the Sanhedrin did to turn the people away from Jesus and to destroy him in the eyes of the people, in spite of all of that, Jesus won. He won every battle he had with the Sanhedrin. And the blessing of redemption is the number 3, came to Israel, and the number 5, the harvest that Jesus wanted from Israel, was given to him. That's very important. You remember when you go back to the parable of the sower, that Jesus explained that there was 4 different responses to the word of God that was actually preached to Israel, and there was only one lot of them, 25% of them, who actually did respond, and even they gave 10-fold, 30-fold, 60-fold, or 100-fold. There was a whole variety among them. But it's difficult for us to take on board when you see that the people here were manipulated by the leadership, that after the resurrection of Jesus, they're liberated and they can give their true response to the Messiah. And they do. So many of them actually become his disciples. That's victory. That's triumph. Thank you for listening. Slán agus beannacht dé live. Goodbye. God bless you.
We live in a media age, of course, an age in which we get almost all of our information either from television or from the internet. Probably less and less of our information is coming through the traditional print media. So in that context, in today's world, an undertaking like Shalom World is incredibly important. And the efforts to catechize and to evangelize through television and through the internet is incredibly important in the world today. And I'm happy to say that my experience of Shalom has been entirely positive, and I am very happy to encourage everyone who's working as part of Shalom World in their efforts to bring the Catholic faith to the world around us. And also I give my special blessing on all those who are involved in Shalom, all those who are watching Shalom, and all the future viewers of Shalom. So thank you, and God bless you.